Hello and welcome to our first set of notes for our second topic. This unit is going to dive into a few things, but the first topic is all about macromolecules. And macromolecules, you probably don't know this word, but you know what macromolecules are. And they are like carbs, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, nucleic acids. These are things that your food is made up of. And so we're going to really dive into what makes a macromolecule and what are the specific functions and examples of macromolecules. So let's get started. To begin with, let's just talk basics. So when we're talking about macromolecules, macro as a prefix means large, right? You've heard of macro versus micro, right? Micro is tiny. We look at microscopes because they look at tiny things, but macro means large, and a macromolecule means a large molecule. And all of the macromolecules that we're going to be looking at today are organic molecules. And maybe you've heard this term too, like when you go to the grocery store and you're looking at all of the organic produce, right? Well, in this case, when we're talking about macromolecules being organic, what I mean by that is that they're made up of certain atoms. And in this case, to be considered organic, it means that they're made up of carbon and hydrogen atoms. So C and H, carbon and hydrogen. When we are talking about macromolecules, sometimes you're going to hear macromolecules be referred to as polymers. And this is kind of confusing because, they basically mean the same thing. Poly means many. Maybe you've heard of this in math class when you hear of a polygon. Poly meaning many, polygon meaning many sides. Well, when we're talking about polymer, we're meaning many units. The mer means unit. So poly means many, mer means unit. A polymer means many units. And you can see that here, right? There's 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units. So a polymer and a macromolecule, interchangeable. But a monomer is the building block of a macromolecule or a building block of a polymer. So mono means 1. So now we're just looking at one of these units. And many monomers makes a polymer. So many single units makes many units, right? That makes sense. So let's dive into our 4 major types of macromolecules. I already named them, but now you can write them down, right? So we have carbohydrates, which I know you've heard before, right? Like bread, rice, lipids, which are like fats, so like oil, butter, proteins, anything that is like eggs, nuts, meat, and then nucleic acids, which is like your DNA, but in the grand scheme of macromolecules like we're talking about, nucleic acids are going to be found in all foods. And I'm going to warn you right now that the next couple of slides do have quite a bit of writing on them, and I would like you to write down everything that you see on the slides. So this is why they're videos. You can pause and write down everything that you need. So diving right into carbohydrates. Remember when we talked just a few slides ago when I said organic molecules must contain carbon and hydrogen? Well, right here you see that carbohydrates are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, right? We can kind of call that CHO. It'll make sense as we go through. But because they have carbon and hydrogen, we know that carbohydrates are organic. So the atoms that make up carbohydrates, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. The monomer is a monosaccharide. So 1, mono, and saccharide means sugar. So 1 sugar is the building block of a carbohydrate. The function is short-term energy storage. This is why right before people go for a run or something, they'll do something called carbo loading, which is when they eat a bowl of pasta or something. It gives them a burst of short-term energy, but it's not good to just only eat carbs because you'll need to constantly be eating them to maintain the level of energy. This is for short bursts of energy. And then examples are monosaccharide, right, 1 sugar, like glucose, disaccharide, 2 sugars, right, 2 sugars, 2 monosaccharides put together is a disaccharide. This is your normal sugar that you see at a table, or lactose, which is found in milk. And then polysaccharides are many sugars put together like starch, cellulose, or glycogen, depending on if you're looking at plants or animals. So that's carbs, right? Breads, pastas, starchy potatoes, anything like that, rice, those are carbs. Moving into lipids, lipids are like your fats and your oils, your butter, lard, anything like that. You'll notice that the atoms are the same in lipids as they are in carbohydrates. So we have a carbon, a hydrogen, and an oxygen. It's just that the way that they're set up in their structures, like in this case you see that it looks like it has like 2 little legs or 3 tails, right? That's what makes a lipid different from a carbohydrate, is the way these 3 atoms are organized in their structures. But because it has carbon and hydrogen, we know that lipids are also organic. The monomer here, or the building block, is 3 fatty acids and 1 glycerol. It's a lot for a monomer, but that is a monomer, or the building block of lipids. The function here is long-term energy storage. So if you want to eat maybe less frequently, but still have energy for like a long-term, maybe for like school or something, right? Like 7 hours of school, you might have a lipid-heavy breakfast or lunch or something like that. And examples of this are phospholipids, which are found in our cell membranes, which we've touched on, but we'll cover way more extensively. But phospholipids, cholesterol, and then fats and oils, like I've been saying this whole time. Our third example is proteins, and proteins are found in like nuts and fish or chicken or steak, eggs, dairy products like yogurt or cheese, anything that is protein heavy. You might be more familiar with this just because it's talked about a lot with people like exercising and trying to like build up muscles. They eat a protein heavy diet. So the atoms here, looks like we added one. So we still have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, right? The 3 that we've been talking about this whole time, but now we're also adding nitrogen. So now proteins, we can abbreviate that as CHON, C-H-O-N. And again, because it has carbon and hydrogen in it, we know that proteins are considered organic. The monomer for proteins, or the building block, is amino acids. There are 20 of them. They look like this picture down here. I am not going to make you memorize the 20 amino acids. I just need you to know that the building block, or the monomer, of proteins is amino acids. And then I put functions and examples together just because there's quite a few of them. But some functions of proteins are movement, and we see this in like our muscles. Transport, our blood cells have hemoglobin, which transports oxygen throughout our entire body. Speeding up chemical reactions are done by enzymes, and we will talk about enzymes next time. Defense in our body, this is done by our immune system. This is done by antibodies. If you know anything about like the COVID vaccine, then you've maybe heard the term antibodies before. We'll talk more about this in class. And then structure, like our hair and our nails, are made up of proteins as well. Okay, and our last one of the 4 macromolecules we're talking about is nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are basically DNA, RNA, our genetic material. And for the atoms here, we have another new one, phosphorus. So now we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. You can abbreviate this as CHOMP. Again, because it has carbon and hydrogen, we know that this is organic. And the monomer, or building block, is a nucleotide. And it looks like this right down here. We've got a sugar, we've got a phosphate, and we have a nitrogenous base. And we'll talk more about this a little bit later on in the year, but this is just kind of to explore this topic. So the function of nucleic acids is to store genetic information to be passed to offspring, and then one gene of DNA can be copied into RNA to make proteins. That's important, and we're going to talk way more about that, but It's good to have that copied down so that you've at least seen it. And then examples of nucleic acids are DNA and RNA, and you can see them up here, right? DNA, that's what's in all of our cells, that's what gives us our genetic code, and it can be copied into this single-stranded RNA, and this RNA can then be used to make proteins in our bodies. All right, I know that was a ton of writing, but I'm super proud of you. Great job, and I'll see you in class.